Hello. Mike Matthews here from Legion Athletics, and welcome to another episode of the Muscle for Life podcast. Do you ever feel like you are just spinning your wheels in the gym? Are you having trouble remembering the last time you added any real weight to the bar on any of your key lifts? Has your body weight or your body fat percentage been hovering in the same range for what seems like forever now? If you answered yes to any of those questions, I understand. I have been there myself, and I know what that is like. I know the frustration firsthand. You see, there is a hard lesson that us weightlifters have to learn, and that is once our honeymoon phase is over, the first 6 to 8 months in most people, the newbie gains phase, as some people call it, after that point, gaining muscle and strength, or continuing to gain muscle and strength, gets harder and harder until eventually progress becomes so damn slow that you can barely measure it. And ironically, that's not even the kicker. Not only is muscle and strength gain harder to come by the more you train, the more training you gotta do just to continue eking out improvements. In other words, as time goes on, you have to do more and more intense work in the gym for less and less reward. And this is one of the key reasons so many people get stuck in a rut. And in this episode, Dr. Mike Israetel explains why this happens, what else contributes to plateaus, and how to overcome these obstacles and keep the needle moving. Now, in case you are not familiar with Dr. Israetel, he has been one of my most requested podcast guests. I've gotten many emails from people asking for me to get him on the show, and for good reason. Not only does he hold a PhD in sport physiology, but he is also the co-founder of Renaissance Periodization, which is a successful blog, coaching program, and fitness platform, similar in many ways to my own company, Legion Athletics. So, in this interview, Mike and I discuss what a real plateau is. I guess that's the first question you got to be able to answer accurately and correctly is, am I plateaued? Many people think they're plateaued when they're not. We also discuss strategies for breaking through legitimate plateaus, the importance of deloads, the order in which you do exercises, sleep hygiene, and more. This is where I would normally plug a sponsor to pay the bills, but I'm not big on promoting stuff that I don't personally use and believe in, so instead I'm just going to quickly tell you about something of mine. Specifically, my 100% natural post-workout supplement Recharge. Recharge helps you gain muscle and strength faster and recover better from your workouts, and it's also naturally sweetened and flavored, and it contains no artificial food dyes, fillers, or other unnecessary junk. All that is why it has over 700 reviews on Amazon with a 4.5-star average, and another 200 on my website, also with a 4.5-star average. So if you want to be able to push harder in the gym, train more frequently, and get more out of your workouts, then you want to head over to www.legionathletics.com and pick up a bottle of Recharge today. And just to show how much I appreciate my podcast peeps, use the coupon code PODCAST at checkout and you will save 10% on your entire order. And lastly, you should also know that I have a very simple 100% money back guarantee that works like this. You either love my stuff or you get your money back, period. You don't have to return the products. You don't have to fill out forms. You don't have to jump through any other hoops or go through any other shenanigans. So you really can't lose here. Head over to www.legionathletics.com now, place your order, and see for yourself why my supplements have thousands of rave reviews all over the internet. And if for whatever reason they're just not for you, contact us and we will give you a full refund on the spot. Alrighty, that is enough shameless plugging for now, at least. Let's get to the show. Mr. Israetel, thank you for coming on my podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you've been one of the consistently requested guests. So Not only am I excited to talk to you myself today because I'm actually curious to hear your thoughts on what we're going to be talking about, I know a lot of my listeners are going to be excited to hear your voice as well.
Oh, thanks so much. Yeah, I'm excited to hopefully say some not stupid things. I'm usually prone to saying plenty of dumb things, so hopefully I reach a minimum there and then get some wisdom going.
It's fine. We can fix it in post. We can edit out whatever. We'll make you sound super smart.
Perfect. It's going to be a lot of editing.
All right. So, what I wanted to talk to you about is breaking through muscle gain hypertrophy plateaus, because as anybody who has a bit of weightlifting and muscle gain slash hypertrophy, obviously those are the same things, but as anybody who has any weightlifting under their belts, any significant amount, at least a year or two, there's no such thing as a plateau in the beginning, right? Like basically whatever you do is going to result in some muscle growth, is going to result in some hypertrophy. Even if you're just doing like push-ups and pull-ups and air squats every day, you're going to, at least for the first few months, be like, ooh, look at my biceps, look at my tricep, look at my chest. But that honeymoon phase, I'd say on average, it's probably about 6 months or so. Some people, it seems to be a bit less, some people a bit more, but definitely by the end of the first year, all of a sudden it's not so easy anymore. You're not adding weight to the bar every week. You're not noticing such major changes in your progress pictures every month. And it only gets progressively more so as you continue. And, I would say then if you are someone like me or like you, I mean, you're far more advanced than I am, but take me where I've been lifting weights since I was 18, but for the first while, I didn't know what I was doing. I've been lifting weights properly for about 6 or 7 years. There's very little left for me in terms of my genetic potential. And it's very easy just to feel stuck. And so that's what I wanted to talk to you about is hitting plateaus. And I think the place to start there would be, we should probably talk about what actually is a plateau, because I often hear from people who think they're plateaued, but they're not. They're actually still progressing. They're just not progressing maybe as quickly as they once were, or as quickly as they would like to be progressing. I don't think that's like actually a plateau. And then what are some strategies that we can use to break through legitimate plateaus?
Yeah, great place to start because I had thought that I would start exactly the same place. And you're completely right. A lot of people think they've hit a plateau where they haven't really sort of done the due diligence to come back and define what it is they mean by a plateau. And a plateau does not mean rates of gain you are unsatisfied with. In that case, everyone always should be considering themselves plateauing because unless I'm turning into Thanos, then I'm plateauing because I would love to be growing faster. Let's say you put on 10 pounds of muscle a month. I mean, that sounds absurd, but what if someone was like, hey, do you want to put on 15? I mean, how many people would really say no? They'd probably say, yeah, sure. So then sort of reflexively, we have to redefine a plateau as like, well, anything under 10 pounds of muscle a month, but that's completely insane.
Right.
So the more direct concern here is that individuals will think that they're at a plateau, whereas they're really, like you described, just transitioning from very noob gains into intermediate gains. Noob gains happen on a weekly and monthly order as far as rep strength on lifts for the weekly, and visual changes that are pretty apparent monthly. And then intermediate gains sort of happen more on the monthly and yearly timescales, right? So monthly, you notice that you're getting considerably stronger. And then, within several months, every year, sort of, you notice that you're looking very different. Right? And that can be a shock. So
Right.
one of the first things to do is to set realistic expectations and to sort of benchmark your progress and figure out if you really are plateauing. Now, one thing that has to be said before we get into any more advanced critiques is that you've got to be measuring your rates of progress, or at least benchmarks of how you're doing, in order to figure out if you're plateauing. So I've spoken to too many people at gyms, and they say, I think my bench is plateauing. I'm like, okay, like how is it plateauing? They're like, well, I think I'm just not getting stronger. I'm like, okay, what's your best rep effort recently? And they're like, I can't remember. I'm like, well, if you can't remember how strong you are, how the hell do you know if you're plateauing? It's completely insane, right? It's like asking a battlefield general to give a report of, how was this week in battle? Did you guys push the German lines?
How
And
do you feel?
right,
How do you feel
exactly.
it's
Like, did you
going?
push the German lines back, or are the Allies winning or losing? We're like, I don't really know. We don't really collect a whole lot of data on where things are, and it's insane.
I'm feeling pretty optimistic right now, though.
Exactly. Yeah, that's kind of how Hitler ran World War II. He was like, I'm feeling good about it, and the generals are like, we're losing. He's like, we're fine. I'm like, okay. So it's one of those things you don't want to really.
Just move those troops over there.
Exactly.
My fear, there are no troops there. Yeah, just move them anyway.
Yeah, They just move. We got to just make more troops. That's where you get all the Nazi zombie movies that are the great, zombie troops. But in any case, so basically, you want to make sure you keep a good logbook, keep tabs on your appearance. Generally speaking, taking pictures is good. Sometimes you feel like you don't, pictures and body weight. You look at, you weighed 165 pounds, you look like something, and then 2 months later, you think like you've plateaued, but then you take a picture and you weigh 168 and you look a little sharper. You're like, oh, well, gee, I don't even know what I was thinking. I'm like, sometimes, you look at enough Instagram pictures of other people and you can get ahead of yourself. And then as far as rep strength, that's the easiest one. That's the sort of golden ticket to benchmark is, how is your repetition strength? And that comes back to the importance of having good, basically identical or very similar technique from week to month on basic exercises. So you can keep track of, see if your squats are actually getting stronger, your pull-ups, your bench press, so on and so forth. And if that's the case, you may find that after analysis, you're not really at a plateau. You're actually at a small rate of improvement. Now, the cool thing is all of the tips I'm going to share, plateau busting, so to speak, are applicable to just making your gains better. So there's not any different tips of like, well, because somebody could say like, well, okay, Dr. Mike, fine, I'm not technically at a plateau, but I don't want to gain 5 pounds on my squat every 2 months. I want to gain 10 or 15. Same tips, so no worries, but at least you can be assured that you're not at a plateau. Technically speaking, a plateau in any definition is defined as a lack of ascension. So on any time scale you want to measure, let's say you're measuring 3 months behind and to now, 3 months ago to now, you're looking at your rep maxes on, let's say you say your quads are plateaued. You look at your best rep efforts on squats, leg presses, and hack squats 3 months ago, and you compare them to today, and you see that there is no increase or a decrease. Like any decrease is definitely a plateau or worse, and no increase as well. The no increase is, of course, there's like sort of a statistical boundary layer about that. What I would say is if a couple of lifts are up a little, like 5 to 10 pounds in strength, but some lifts are down, and you've been doing all of these lifts the whole time, it's not just a learning thing, I would still call that a plateau. If all lifts are up, even if it's all lifts are up by 5 pounds, so for example, your squat 10 RM used to be 315, now it's 320. Leg press 405, now it's 410. Hack squat 365, now it's 370. All the lifts are pointed up. That's not technically a plateau, right? Because you're technically still gaining. It's just really slow gains. Again, it doesn't really matter because all the recommendations for faster gains are still the same. But what you're really looking at a plateau is this. If you had to be a trial lawyer against your own gains and you had to prove to yourself that you definitely weren't gaining, and to a judge, could you do it? Right? So you just stand in front, you're a Southern lawyer, it's like 90 in the courtroom, you've got a white suit, you've got glasses, you're patting your face with a handkerchief, right? You say, when I say, and you point to the gains chart and you say, look, you can say to me that you've been making gains and your squat reps have gone up by 1 rep and 5 pounds respectively, but your hack squat and leg press are both down by 1 to 2 reps. Are you willing to tell this courtroom that that is your idea of what gains are? And of course, you'd have to come back to yourself and be like, well, no, right? Because another way to think of it is somebody asks you, somebody you're close with, and
then you just pull a Bill Clinton. You go, well, it depends how you define
what
gains.
do you mean by gains? What do you mean by if? Totally. And the thing is, you could pull a Bill Clinton and say, what do you mean by gains? But look, everyone gains means plus sign, right? It means more. Now, there is a very fruitful, though pointless debate to be had about it does 5 pounds on your lifts over a year mean gains? Technically, it does. There are some very advanced arguments for that. Stochastic noise tears all that up, and you can't actually be sure that you're making gains, right? But at least it's up, right? But the thing is, if multiple exercises are up just a little, but even one exercise is down, you're no longer sure, right? And then if multiple exercises are down, even though some are up, you're definitely going to say, like, I'm not clearly making it. So fundamentally, muscle size expansion is everywhere and always in an equated fatigue state going to mean you get to do more reps or do more weight, right? If someone came to you and they're like, I think I put on size on my quads, but like I can't see it because it's covered by fat, what are you going to tell them? You're like, let me see your squat, leg press, hack squat, lunge numbers, right? And let's say all of the numbers are up like 20 to 25 pounds for the same reps. What are you going to do? Say they didn't gain size? Yeah, I believe you. Like, it makes sense. Like, Ronnie Coleman doesn't squat 225 for 10 reps. You know what I mean? Like, he squatted 585 for 10 reps. Like, that kind of makes sense. So it's one of those, like, if you're getting stronger for reps, you're doing super well. If it's just not clear that all around and all exercises you're getting stronger for reps, I don't know about that, right? So we basically have a definition of a plateau as if you clearly just didn't make gains all around over whatever time course. And if you
And
lost,
on that time, just punch up on that, or I just wanted to get your thoughts on the timing, the duration specifically, because I would think that matters depending on. So let's say they're in the year 2, 3, 4, something around. I know those aren't all the same, but let's just say they're not a 10+ year veteran, for example. So for someone who has a few years of proper lifting behind them, what type of time horizon should they be looking at? Would you recommend looking at their numbers over the course of a month or maybe a quarter or 6 months? In terms of determining, like, obviously, if they were to look week to week, they'd be like, "Oh, I'm stuck." Like, no, you're not.
right?
You're the weekly gains. That life is behind you now.
Yeah. So there's two problems with weekly gains. There's the small problem of the fact that you no longer make weekly gains fast enough in order to be reflected accurately on a bar. For example, if you increase your squat 2.5 pounds per week, right, that's actually unbelievable. That's really good. But every other week you're going to think you stalled because the plates only add up to 5. You know what I mean? Like, so that's a small problem. The bigger problem is this. Within the context of an accumulation phase of a mesocycle, which means weeks 1 through 4, 1 through 6, or 1 through 8, in which you're increasing the weight on the bar, decreasing the reps in reserve, trying to match the same reps or going up in reps, adding more sets, right? The accumulation phase means like making things harder, right? Just meat and potatoes training during one of those phases before you deload, right, and really drop fatigue and sort of restart the next mesocycle. There is an increase in fitness, right? So muscle growth is occurring, although I will say that growth occurs on multiple time scales. There's parts of muscle or components of muscle that don't grow for weeks until you're done training for a certain phase, but some muscle growth occurs on an hourly basis. So growth is occurring during that time. Your nervous system is expanding its abilities to activate muscles and bring in good technique. So your fitness is going up, your ability to do more reps and more weight is going up during that time. But here's the real kicker: concomitantly, fatigue is also going up during that time. And if you're training properly, I would say that fitness and fatigue go up at roughly the same rate every single week until you deload. Once you deload, fatigue comes down, fitness stays basically the same, and you reveal this new capability that you have, right? For example, do you get better as an MMA fighter training for 2 hours? Of course, yeah, that's how you get better. The thing is, if you had to fight John Jones, I know, scary, would you choose to fight him fresh or after a 2 hour session? Well, of course, after a 2 hour session, let somebody beat up on him for a while. And maybe he won't kill you. He'll just maim you, something like that. He'll be tired. But could you really say, well, now he's worse after these aliens come down? They have someone fight John Jones before he trains. They have him fight after he trains for 2 hours. The person who fights him before gets maimed worse. And aliens conclude, oh, interesting. It seems that this training process makes him worse. We will do less training process and he will become the best. Like, no, that doesn't work like that. He's actually getting better during training, but he gets tired too. So week to week measurements of am I getting better are what my colleague Dr. James Hoffman and I in RP Plus, we have a service, it's like $10 a month or something, where you log in and ask us all the questions you want. We answer them on video webinar every week. What we like to say is weekly sort of performance analyses, week to week to week, are almost completely pointless and sometimes worse because they just confuse the shit out of you.
Yep. You can liken it to, I mean, I run into more women than men who make this mistake because women are so indoctrinated to live and die by the scale. But you have women out there who are just starting in their fitness journeys and they weigh themselves every day. And, they freak out when they wake up 1 pound heavier, and then they're super happy if they wake up 1 pound lighter. And it can just be very confusing if they don't understand the bigger picture.
Super confusing. So I would say that when to benchmark your plateaus, or when to conclude that when to do the analysis comparatively to see your plateaus at the earliest mesocycle to mesocycle.
That makes sense. Yeah.
So basically, after you've done a deload week and you're nice and fatigue reduced, you look, and you do another month of training, right? Then you compare 2 months, right, or 2 mesocycles. So let's say each mesocycle is 5 weeks of increasing accumulation, 1 week of deload, 6 weeks total. Then you compare a 6-week period you had 12 weeks ago to the one you just had. You look at the numbers. Hopefully, it's the same exercises. Comparing different exercises is wholly pointless, by the way, because people will be like, well, I squatted this and this mesocycle, but I leg pressed this and that one. Am I making gains? But I have no idea. How the hell are you supposed to, like, what's the ratio there? So same exercise, 2 different mesos, fatigue reduced, or the same average fatigue. And basically, if you wanted to do a real advanced analysis, or you really wanted to be curmudgeon-y, you could do the average weight and reps for every single session you did of that exercise in the first mesocycle, add all that up, divide by the however many reps, And then do the same thing for the second to see, okay, like what's the average performance, right? And you don't have to do that. You can just go on the end of week PRs. Like, what PR did you hit the last mesocycle versus the one you just finished, right? Like if you squatted 315 for 8 in the one mesocycle ago, but you hit 320 for 12 in the last one, I mean, clearly you're not like stalling, right? Now, could you have had a slightly better performance just by chance, or you just got a little bit more sleep, or the first mesocycle you were breaking up with your girlfriend, so it was on your mind? Yeah, totally. That's why the average system works better. But the average system is a huge pain in the ass to do. You can just work on PRs and it works totally fine. And this brings me to my next point. Because there's a little bit of a chance element, even in comparing PRs, even comparing averages meso to meso, what you really want to do is compare probably what we call block to block, 2 to 4 sequential mesocycles in a row compared to one another to the next 2 to 4 mesocycles in a row. Like, that's probably a good basis for comparison.
Yeah, that makes sense.
An even better basis of comparison, and this just gets more into the advanced lifting, is macrocycle to macrocycle. So, for example, you could have a fat loss block and you can have a muscle gain block, each one 3 mesocycles long, one where you lose fat, one where you gain muscle. You can compare your rep PRs from fat loss to muscle gain and say, oh man, like I've hit a plateau. First of all, like, of course, you're going to perform worse in the fat loss one because you're at a hypocaloric condition. Did you actually lose muscle? Well, that's not really that clear. So what you want to do is compare macro to macro, which means this past fat loss block of 3 mesocycles of fat loss and hypertrophy training, how does it compare to the last time you did a fat loss block? If the comparison is like, gee, you're just about the same strength, you've hit a plateau. If the comparison is like, oh, you're like up 20 pounds on every lift for the same reps, you did not hit a plateau, and no harm, no foul.
Yep, that makes sense. Something else that just pops into my mind because it's a mistake that I've seen people make is comparing, let's say you're comparing their squat, right? And they're looking at a squat in one mesocycle versus another. But what they didn't factor in is that in the first mesocycle, they were squatting that was the first exercise, let's say, of that workout that they did. And then in the next mesocycle, they moved it to their third exercise and they're looking and they don't think with that. They just see the number went down and think like, oh, I'm stuck.
Yep. That's a great point. I mean, it's just a very great point. And I'd love to segue off of that point of use your brain to make sure you're comparing like versus like to the next point I have about what to consider and all these factors and sort of solving your problem of plateauing. So let's say you are plateaued, right? The next point, very similar to the one you just made, as far as like, come on, like at least compare the same exercise order. You should know that you get tired through the exercises. The next, come on, you could do better kind of point, sorry to get pedantic, is do you deload? Because it's funny because like I've literally, how many times have you spoken to guys at the gym and they're like, I think I hit a plateau. You'd be like, you mean like even after your deload? They're like, what's a deload? And you're like, oh boy, let me tell you that you're onto some really good shit. It's, fundamentally, a deload is a phase of fatigue reduction that lasts roughly a week, and you get to maintain all of your muscle gains and your strength, but your fatigue goes down because as you train, like we mentioned earlier, through an accumulation phase, your fatigue goes up and up and up, and it masks your ability to have your best performances. It's like saying during the construction of a house, how much better is the interior looking? Well, while the house is being constructed, there's like more and more sawdust and wood chips everywhere. So it actually looks more and more like shit the entire time. Or yeah, well, as you're building the TV stand and the area where the couch should be and the cool roof, it sort of looks cooler because of that. But then it's more and more garbage that the builders are leaving there every day, like, and stuff's all hanging around. So it's kind of like on average, if you ask an interior designer to look at the house in month 1 and month 8 of its construction, they'd be like, yeah, but it's got more cool stuff, but it also has way more crap in it. So it's just the comparison is completely masked. So I will make a claim here. Is I think the majority, I don't know what percent it is, but the majority, probably the vast majority of individuals in the early intermediate stage of lifting who are, let's say, not super duper well read on online fitness expert kind of stuff, probably, maybe early listeners of your podcast and folks whom those listeners are going to send your podcast to be like, you better listen to this. I think the vast majority of those people, anytime they say they have a plateau, it's really just that they don't deload and they don't know how. And they just don't even know it's a concept. And it's not a knock on those people. Good God, I must have lifted for 5 or 6 years before I knew what a deload was. But that's how people get into that situation. Maybe even 9 times out of 10.
Or how many times have we just stubbornly, I know I have stubbornly not wanted to deload because like, oh, things are going well, just keep going. And then things just don't go so well.
Things are not. And then you're plateaued and then you deload. And then the next week you're like, oh my God, I'm a living God. I'm 50 times stronger than I thought I was. Like, ta-da, right? So my first recommendation is deload. And if you don't know what that means, look it up, right? There's tons of it. You just type in deload definition on Google, and then you're going to get hit with a ton of stuff.
You might even find an article I wrote on it over at Muscle for Life. If anyone listening, if you search for deload.
Exactly. Yep. You'll find articles by you, by me. Like, there's one on Juggernaut that my colleague and I wrote a long time ago, like fatigue and its causes, or, what is fatigue? And there's just tons of stuff about how to deload, just the real simple basics that a lot of people just don't do, because you walk into a gym, 95% of the people won't be able to tell you what a deload is. So when those people say, man, like I'm kind of hitting a plateau, automatically light bulb as a trainer or coach or someone who knows stuff should come up in your head and be like, this is probably just an accumulated fatigue issue. As soon as you remove accumulated fatigue, it turns out they were making gains the entire time. So I think that has to be the first thing that's said.
Yep. I totally agree.
Hey, quickly, before we carry on, if you are liking my podcast, would you please help spread the word about it? Because no amount of marketing or advertising gimmicks can match the power of word of mouth. So if you are enjoying this episode and you think of someone else who might enjoy it as well, please do tell them about it. It really helps me. And if you are going to post about it on social media, definitely tag me so I can say thank you. You can find me on Instagram at Muscle for Life Fitness, Twitter at Muscle for Life, and Facebook at Muscle for Life Fitness.
Okay, so let's say that we have somebody, again, they have a few years of weightlifting behind them and they have good form and they're good at the exercises now. They've made all the easy, they've grabbed all the low-hanging fruit. Now they just they're going to have to work a lot harder for a lot less. They're in the beginning of that really the rest of their life journey. That's the way it is, right? You got to work harder and harder and harder for less and less. And so they've hit a plateau and it's a legitimate plateau. They are deloading. What next? How does the flow chart play out?
Yep. I got a whole list. No worries. So the next is still kind of a backdrop kind of thing, but it's so important. It has to be said. And we don't have to spend much time on it because this podcast today is probably about training, right? But it's one of these things that kind of has to be said, but that has to be said is innuendo for it's really, really important. Is your nutrition fundamentally sound? Is your sleep fundamentally enough? Are you gaining weight at a rate high enough for it to reflect itself on the scale so that you're actually fueling and providing substrates for the muscle growth process? And lastly, possibly not least, are you managing stress and various stressors effectively, which can include other physical activity forms? So someone could say, man, I'm really struggling to bring in my arms. I'm like, okay, tell me about your life. And I go, blah, blah, I eat, I sleep well, blah, blah, blah. What else do you do? Like, well, I'm a Division I wrestler and I practice 6 hours a day. You're like, Jesus Christ, I'm surprised you can do any weight training at all on top of that, right? So that's one of those stress management things, and that's not the only kind of. There's psychological stress. Like people, I've literally had these conversations, and people often ask me how I come up with these examples on the spot. This is literally stories from my life, right? I've literally had conversations with people at the gym, like, yeah, I think I'm hitting a plateau, and I used to piss away minutes and minutes and minutes talking to them about nutrition and stuff I'll get into in a little bit, volume landmarks and all this crap. And they're like, yeah, I'm going through a really rough divorce right now. And I'm like, why the hell are we talking about anything else? Of course, your divorce is going to make you super stressed, which increases all kinds of stress hormones, which literally at the molecular level interfere with muscle growth. In addition to that, you say someone's like, oh, we're just moving down the list here for weight gain. Someone says, I'm really having trouble bringing up my quads. So one of the first questions I'll ask will be like, how much do you weigh? Like 165. Like, how much weight have you gained in the last year? They're like, I haven't. Like, okay, where do you think bigger quads come from? Like, is there a 165 pounder that has the quads of a 240 pound bodybuilder? No, because they physically weigh more than that. You know what I mean? Like, some people say like, oh, I'm not growing muscle. I'll be like, are you gaining weight? Like, no, where the hell's the muscle supposed to come from? So that's one of the main things is make sure to slowly gain weight,
gotta make those lean gains, bro.
Exactly. Yeah. Cause all those huge guys making lean gains everywhere. Right. So that's a thing. The other one is sleep. Super important. There's multiple studies now showing that if you don't sleep enough, you literally, when you lose weight, you lose mostly muscle and barely any fat. And if you gain weight, you gain mostly fat and barely any muscle. It's really, really rough. So sleep is critical. And here's the thing about sleep that I've been noticing more and more. Even relatively good athletes undersleep. And there's an ethos to athletics and to trying and to life and to the kind of people that are interested in being the best. There's an ethos there that sleep is sort of for the weak. and that it's kind of optional, and there's kind of this almost pride of not. People will tell you like, oh, I don't get no, like I do Brazilian jiu-jitsu, right? And people find out that I like know some shit, so they ask me questions, and I zoom in on sleep. At least at some point in the conversation, they're like, yeah, I definitely don't get enough of that, but that's life. And I'm like, yeah, it doesn't have to be life. I see your bitch ass posting them Game of Thrones updates. I know you do some other shit. You have free time. That dragon fire fucking analysis you wrote on Facebook. I see it. So
yeah, that took 7 hours.
exactly. Like I see you debating people on Instagram about Game of Thrones directorial debuts and stuff. But like, so it's one of those things where it's like, I'm not going to be pedantic and tell someone what they need to do with their life, but like, there's no honor in missing sleep. If you want gains, sleep is where to get them, combined with good nutrition. So it's one of those things where I think a lot of people assume, like, oh, of course, this person I'm speaking to that's talking to me about plateaus gets enough sleep. It's just by no means clear that that's the case. It often isn't. It's funny enough. There's this bodybuilder that I follow on Instagram, and he's a very, very good bodybuilder. He's, pro. And he like made a post. He's like, just trained a bunch of clients, and did a bunch of work, and I'm eating meals, and I'm going straight to the gym. No sleep for me tonight. Like, he literally missed a night of sleep. He's like, I got to grind. I got to make these gains. I just wanted to like find him in real life and shake the living shit out of him. What the hell are you doing? Right? It's just the worst idea anyone's ever had. But again, there's an ethos there, right? Like, how does Elon Musk make all his money? Like, he doesn't sleep or whatever, even though I'm sure he does. You know what I mean? Like, does that resonate at all? Where people think it's just part of life?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, speaking of Elon Musk, I saw an article, maybe it was a month or two ago, where he was saying how the past year was pretty rough on him and was going into why, and how he wasn't able to sleep without drugs. I mean, it got that bad where if he wasn't taking, I don't know if it was prescription or over the counter, I don't remember, but if he wasn't taking a sleep drug, he probably wasn't going to sleep. So yeah, like I understand. I read the Elon Musk biography, and I'm sure the stories of him, sleeping 3 hours a day on his beanbag are true. And he probably had to do it because he had to do it, and it
But
was
he's
that
not
or die,
jacked,
basically, as far as his business goes. He's not jacked, and it has taken a toll on his health. I mean, he talked about it. He talked about the toll that undersleeping has taken on him, both mentally and physically, as well as working 100+ hours a week, for months on end. And so, yes, it's admirable to be able to that somebody has the willpower to do that. And I guess you could say in his case, there's a big payoff, not just the money, but he probably is honestly driven by this mission to like get to Mars. And so for him, he's like, fuck my health. I don't care. I want to go to Mars. And that's admirable. I think it's admirable, but let's not
pretend it makes you jacked.
not only that, but it's like, especially if he's sacrificing, he is making sacrifices. He could feel a lot better mentally, physically, psychologically, emotionally if he weren't pushing himself so hard. And for him, it's worth it. But is it worth it if we're talking about arguing with randoms on Twitter about Game of Thrones? Like,
Exactly.
it's not the same. It's not
right. Building a technological empire is not what's keeping you awake. Like
exactly. And I can speak to this personally. I know we're a little bit tight on time, so I don't want to eat up too much of it. I want you to be able to keep going. But over the last couple of years, over the last 2 to 3 years, my sleep has progressively gotten worse and stabilized at like kind of like a generally bad level. And I don't know if it's a consequence of having another baby and it's probably a number of things. Having another baby who doesn't sleep well, more stress from just as things get bigger. Yeah, it's cooler, bigger numbers, but the bigger problems, bigger headaches, the stakes are higher, more pressure and other issues that have made my life more, I guess you could say, just more stressful. Fortunately, it hasn't exhibited in the way of like anxiety or anything, but I feel a bit less relaxed as a person than I did maybe 5 years ago. And I was sleeping great 5 years ago. And I was one of those people. It was odd because I would naturally sleep about 6.5 hours or so and wake up. And I went for years like that, I was training hard, I was making progress, I was working hard. Like I literally had no symptoms of undersleeping. I may have been, I probably was, but for some reason.
almost certainly you weren't. Because if you don't have symptoms, you're probably not undersleeping.
So whatever it was, I was like, I would fall asleep in 5 minutes and I would have blackout unconscious sleep and I would wake up about 6.5 hours later and that was it. And I'd rarely wake up at night. I even wanted to see my deep sleep. So I got one of those rings or something. And I was averaging around 3 to 4 hours of deep sleep. So anyways, things seem to be okay. And then things are not okay. So I can have personal appreciation for the difference. Like if I'm not sleeping well, I'll still go to the gym and I'll still do my workouts. I don't want to just drop exercise altogether, but I can appreciate now the difference that it makes. Like the RPE of workouts goes way up when you're not sleeping well. So that alone can be the factor. And in the case of my training, I have been a bit plateaued for some time now. I've made slow progress, but the number one reason is sleep. And number two is the weight gain, like you brought up, at least I'm cognizant of these things. So it doesn't stress me out. I'm not like, why am I stuck? It's that maybe I've been unwilling to lose my abs. And so that doesn't mean that I'm like underfeeding myself, but it means that I'm not doing what it takes to make sure that I can progress.
Exactly. Absolutely. And you cover that last one. The fundamental, weight gain, yeah. And then also just fundamental nutrition, because sometimes people are like, yeah, I'm gaining weight, but I eat like a pizza a day and a protein shake in the morning and that's it. Okay, so if you go with someone and you go, do you deload? Yes. Okay, great. If not, then you help them learn how to do it. Is your nutrition fundamentally good? Are you sleeping? Are you gaining weight? Are you managing stress? If you X out all of those, most people, again, 90% are no longer plateauing.
It's true.
You fix their plateau.
Assuming they have any sort of halfway intelligent workout programming.
100%. Yeah, totally. So, and now that brings us to the workout program. So the critical component of almost everyone who's concerned about plateauing is training hard enough in the sense that they bring their sets relatively close to failure and they're trying to lift relatively heavy. I've very few people, there's the kind of people that don't train hard enough. They're usually just not concerned about plateaus, right? They're just kind of, just read the newspaper in between sets, that sort of thing. So big factor in determining rates of gain is your volume, your training volume. And that basically is on a spectrum from what we'd call minimum effective volume all the way to maximum recoverable volume. So here's a trap people get caught in. They do their workout where they train their biceps every week, several sessions. Total number of sets per week that they do for biceps is, say, 10. Okay? When they were a beginner, their minimum effective volume was 1 set per week. Like you can get beginners to grow from 1 set of biceps per week, right? Like literal first timers. And after a couple of months, that might go to like 6 to 8 sets a week, where you can make really good gains on just training your arms maybe twice a week for 3 or 4 sets at a time. After 1, 2, 3 years, your minimum effective volume, the minimum amount of physical number of sets that it takes, hard sets, to grow your biceps might actually exceed 8 or 10, right? And for many people, and your minimum effective volume slowly trends up through your entire lifting career. So what you might be doing is running an amount of volume that is no longer sufficient to make gains for you, and you're sort of baffled and puzzled at the sort of details. It's kind of like gaining weight from 100 pounds to 200 pounds to 300 pounds and wondering why like an apple no longer fills you up. Well, you're a different size now. Like it's going to take 2, 3, 4 apples, right? Same idea. So you got to try to figure out what your minimum effective volume is, and if you're training above that. Second thing is you got to try to figure out what your maximum recoverable volume is and make sure you're not training over that. The human body and every individual muscle can only recover from a certain amount of volume at a time, period. And if you exceed that amount of volume per week, especially, then your body spends all of its resources healing you from the muscle damage and has no resources left over to actually make you better. Recovery precedes adaptation. Right. So like your body's going to try to fix you first, and then it's going to work on whatever it's got left to make you better. If you train so much that your body can only barely fix you or not even, you're not recovering, then you essentially are in a position where you've mathematically ruled out muscle growth altogether.
Now, that's pretty hard to do, though, right? I mean, I don't know what your thought. I'm very curious as to your thoughts. Something that I'll often say is for most people out there who want to be fit, like take the average guy to look the way he wants to look. He needs to gain probably around 40 pounds of muscle in the right places on his body. For the average woman, at least these are the people in my orbit. The average woman, maybe 15 pounds, maybe a little bit more in the right places on her body. And she's going to be pretty happy. Of course, these people may at that point go, hey, I want more. I want this. I want that. But at that point, they're probably at least 80% there of like, I look great and I'll keep my body fat percentage around. If the guys are somewhere around 10, 12% and the women 20-ish, and they're like, cool, I look awesome. So those are the people I'm mostly speaking to. And for that, what I generally say is 10 to 20 hard sets per major muscle group per week is like 10 would be closer to that minimal effective if you are not brand new, and 20 would be closer to that maximum for recovery. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's a very good place to start. But we just got to make sure that individuals are not left behind with that. So one of the newest pieces of research, which seems to be pretty solid, is that what previously people who were called hard gainers or non-responders in training studies, they're actually ones with really high minimum effective volumes. And it turns out training them more is actually more of the solution than training them less. As you think like, oh, it's a recovery problem. Well, it's probably not. They're probably slower twitch individuals that just can handle a ton of volume, and their hypertrophy signaling is just pretty robust in the sense they're not robust. It's in the sense they just need a really big signal to grow. So what I will say is, yeah, you could be one of those people for whom roughly 10 is your minimum effective volume, but I'll put it to you this way. If you're training, let's say 12 or 14 sets per week for your whatever body part, and you notice that you don't really ever get super big pumps, you're not ever really like remotely sore, and it just perceptively seems like just not a lot of effort, you're like, oh, I'm breezing through it. Man, there's a good chance you're under your minimum effective volume or
Yeah.
just really
Yeah.
close
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
it so that you're getting minimum effect.
I would say that's exactly me in that range of
Yeah, there you go.
about 12, give or take a few hard sets is like, it's a good workout. But it's
You're
that
not
point.
writing home about it.
Yeah. Where I didn't feel like I had to work that hard to get
For
through it.
sure, for sure. And then on the other side of the spectrum, there's individuals that are basically, people say like, oh yeah, your MRV of 20, you should go up to 20 sets every now and again. You'll be fine. Some individuals at 16 sets per week, and it depends on the body part too. They could be like you're just chronically sore, like over what we call overlapping DOMs, where you never actually heal. You just get sore and then get sore again and then get sore again on top of soreness, which people do and they expect results, right? Like, oh, I watched a Kai Green workout where he does 100 sets. I'm going to do that. And crushing delayed onset soreness, an inability so basically they get weaker and weaker from session to session or week to week, and they feel just completely overwhelmed. The amount of volume psychologically seems insane. Another one is they get a pump midway through the workout, and their workouts are so voluminous that they lose their pump. Like the pump goes away or gets worse.
That's
Yeah.
interesting. I've never had that happen. Like, so,
Oh
wow.
yeah, that's well. When's the last time you've done 30 sets for chest in one workout, right? Like
Yep.
people do that kind of stuff. So that's the thing. So it's probably best to think of minimum effective volume and maximum recoverable on a per session basis, actually, than per week. Although per week works just fine. So I would say anywhere between roughly 3 sets for an intermediate, 3 sets per session to about 10 sets per session per muscle group is where most of the best gains are going to be. But again, those modifiers has to be based on personal feedback. Like if I'm saying 3, but you don't feel a fucking thing at 3, do 4, do 5, do 6. If I'm saying you should be able to survive 10 productively, but at 8, you're basically like a broken doll, like like Mr. Potato Head with his arm out. Yeah, 8's probably too much for you, right? So it's about finding your own volume landmarks and it moving from your minimum effective volume to your maximum recoverable slowly over a mesocycle, deloading, and then repeating that movement with heavier weights. That is a huge thing because a lot of times when people have their ducks in a row for nutrition, sleep, weight gain, stress management, what they end up doing is they're just training below their MEV or above their MRV, or at least trying to train above their MRV. I've actually had multiple people, I'm sure you've had this experience where they're like, I'm trying this XYZ program on musclebody.com again, and I only made it through 2 weeks last time. Do you have any tips on how I can make it more? Like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Just cut the volume by half and try go. And they're like, yeah, but then it doesn't work. Like, work for who? Like individuals vary in their recovery and adaptation proclivities, but they just do. So you have to tailor the program to yourself. So you have to make sure you're between MEV and MRV. And it's not rocket science either, like.
At the same time, though, there aren't that many people out there who are talking about it and who are explaining it in a way that anybody can understand it and actually do something with it and have a practical takeaway where they're not just confused because of all the jargon. And you know what I mean? So I think you're doing a great job explaining it, which
Well, thanks.
I'm enjoying listening myself. It's great.
Thank you so much. At the end of the day, it's like, are you getting pumps? Are you getting a little bit sore? Are you getting fatigued? If no, do more. Are you getting violently sore? Is your performance going down session to session? Or do you feel completely crushed and overwhelmed by the amount of volume you do either per session or per week? If yes, do less, right? I mean, there's not like a way in which you're going to be getting crushed and super sore and just unbelievably messed up. And someone's like, oh, if you just alternate the way you move your thumbs on this exercise, you'll get big. Like, what the hell are you talking about? There's just no recovering from what you're doing to yourself. There's something we mentioned in a recovery book. If you train in excess of your maximum recovery volume, there's nothing that's going to save you. No amount of drugs, no amount of sleep, no amount of anything is going to save you. You got to train less. And on the other hand, if you're not training enough, by God, right? And brings me to another quick point is a cool modification you can make to your program is to use frequency to modulate your volume landmarks. So basically, someone could say, okay, here's the deal. I'm trying to make my side delts bigger. I get those shoulder caps. I can do 15 sets of side delts and I get a bit of a pump. I get a tiny bit sore, but the soreness heals like a day later. I train shoulders twice a week and I can do 15 sets each time, but I legitimately can tell you right now it's not at my MRV. Like I could do more per session. I just get too tired to do more. And then I'm just using like the 10 pounds for laterals, which I think is stupid. It's
Yeah, I
totally
was trying to think of like 15 sets per session of
what are
side
you even
raises.
doing,
No
right?
thanks.
Exactly. So then the response is, well, you do shoulders twice a week, but they heal so fast that they are ready more than twice a week. They're like, well, then just do them 3 times a week. They're like, oh, okay. So then you end up starting with 10 sets per session, 3 times a week. And then because you're, baller enough to be able to do 15 sets per session, now you're up to 45 sets per week. And look, if you don't grow from 45 sets, shit is just not in the cards for you, right? Or your nutrition is wrong, sleep is wrong, so on and so forth. So it's one of those things like if you discover that your minimum effective volumes per week are pretty high, and or your maximum recoverable volumes are so high that it's hard for you to get into that range of main effect between MEV and MRV, then add sessions. Okay. There's nothing you can't do with added sessions. You can do 6 workouts per week of shoulders with 10 sets each time. And 10 sets for delts, like you do 5 sets of laterals, a minute rest between each one, and you do 5 sets of cable upright rows, a minute rest between each one. That takes like 20 minutes or something. It's not the end of the world. That's 60 working sets per week. Okay. And if you take those to relatively close to failure, that's enough stimulus to grow for anybody. So I think sort of the more salient point here is that people say, my legs aren't big enough. I need more legs. I'm already training super hard. How many times do you train legs per week? Why train once? Leg day. It's a really bad idea. It's been shown in the literature that 1 time per week training, unless you're really, really big and really, really strong, is just you're going to heal soon enough that you can capitalize on training again. And if you train so hard that you don't heal soon enough, you're training too hard in that session and you overwhelm your recovery and adaptation abilities and just you're barely surviving at that point, right? Can you imagine someone asking you like, hey, I need bigger legs. And you're like, okay, what are you doing for legs? And they list this workout of like 40 working sets, so on and so forth. And you're like, oh my God, like you're clearly training enough. Like, yeah, I do that once every 4 weeks though. And you're like, what? You train your legs once every 4 weeks? And you're like, well, yeah, I mean, like otherwise I can't recover. Like, why don't you train them easier and train them twice a week? Like, oh, I never thought about it like that. Because, there's, again, this ethos of like, you got to pour it out into your muscle groups, right? You got to suffer. You got to milk it out. People are obsessed with finishers. You ever hear that term, finisher? Like, this is a good finisher for pecs. Like, finisher, in my idea, is just something people do in porn. But, lo and behold, apparently it's a thing in training as well. Like, oh, I really finished hard in my workout. Like, what are we talking about the same thing here? Right? So, yeah, me too. But it wasn't really a workout. I was by myself. But in any case, it's one of those things where it's almost this catharsis, this religious drive to just milk everything out and just destroy the muscle. And the thing is, somebody said back in the day, yeah, crush it, kill your workout, bro. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, is it like a 500-meter out, like downwind sniper shot kill? Are we talking about carpet bombing kill? Like, what kind of kill are we talking, right? So like, it's kind of, what is it? Stimulate, don't annihilate. There's a lot of truth to that. And stimulate means it's fucking hard. We're not saying do sissy workouts. It's hard, but it's not the end of the world. And as soon as you start training hard, 3 to 10 sets per session, close to failure, then all of a sudden you can recover from more sessions per week and you get better growth. So when people are saying, well, I'm already training hard, a lot of times you can zoom in on the frequency and be like, okay, are you sure you're training often enough and not too hard per session? Are you spreading out your volume? Let me give you almost the perfect analogy for this. In another realm that's very related to nutrition, have you ever had people tell you that they're already eating a ton and they can't eat anymore because they can't gain weight? And you're like, all right, like, what are you eating? And they describe this monstrous meal, and you're like, holy shit, this guy maybe he is a hard gainer. And then you've been around long enough to be like, so how many of those do you eat a day? And they're like, well, like 1 really, because I get so full after I can't eat anymore. Like, well, here's your problem, idiot. Right? So maybe you could cut that meal by half and have 4 of those per day. It's that consistent eating. How many times when Brian Shaw or Hafthor Bjornsson, when they're gaining weight, how many times are they vomit full? Almost never. How many times are they very full? All the time, right? You don't want to get vomit full when you're gaining weight because it's going to burn you out for your next meal, right? You get heartburn psychologically. Like you're like, I'm not going to be vomiting every meal. Fuck that. I quit, right? So you're just not going to eat enough meals. So how big should your meals be for you to gain weight consistently? Big enough to really be tough to eat, but for like 3, 4, 5 hours later for you to be like, all right, let's do this again. Same thing for workouts.
Yep. And that often comes down to appetite. I find that a lot of guys who think that they're hard gainers, they actually just have small appetites. Like,
100%.
2,500 calories a day to them is like, oh, I'm so full.
Dude, it's so funny. People ask me, they're like, what are your macros like? And you're like, I just finished a fat loss phase. Like, what are your macros? I'm like, oh, you have roughly 2,700 calories per day or something like that. And they're like, oh my God, that's so much. I'm like, I'm starving to death. Are you out of your mind? They forget like I weigh like 230 pounds. It's not a lot when you weigh 230, and it's just a scaling factor. But in any case, it's one of those situations where, going back to the workout stuff, it's not how hard you train every session so much as it is, are you doing enough work over the week? And if you are training so hard that you can't recover to do enough work over the week, then you should probably think about expanding your frequency. So I'll just really, really actual down to earth kind of advice. If you're training a muscle group only once a week, don't come and talk to anyone about plateaus, because you just have nothing to say about them because you're not training often enough. If you're training a muscle 2 times per week, consider 3 times. If you're training a muscle 3 times per week, and it's one of those situations where every single workout you're like, man, either I would get really sore if I did more, or I feel like I can really do more and be just fine. Maybe experiment with 4 times a week, especially if it's a smaller muscle that heals really quickly, like side delts, rear delts, biceps, calves, forearms, traps. A lot of times, like, you can train those every other day, sometimes even every day, and be just fine. If someone training their legs hard, 3 to 10 sets per session, 3 times a week, like quads, I'm not inclined to be like, add a 4th session. Like, yeah, you're probably at the very end of what you could do. But it's one of those situations where, if you're training once a week, start training twice. If you're training twice, experiment with 3. You might be pleasantly surprised. If you're training every muscle at least 3 times a week, adding a 4th session might work for the smaller muscles, etc. Probably won't work for the bigger ones. And then you can look at other factors.
Makes sense. And I would just add that for people who don't have the time, they'll say that they have maybe 3 to 5 hours a week that they can be in the gym training. You're not going to be able to train everything multiple times a week in that time, or at least not with much volume. So you're going to have to think with, you could say, specializing, or you have to think with each mesocycle going, all right, I'm going to do extra pulling for the next, that's going to be my 3 times a week, or I'm going to do extra, my pecs are behind. So I'm going to do a bit more chest. Obviously, if you have endless time, then, because I'm saying that because I hear from people who hear advice like that and they're like, yeah, that makes sense, but I actually don't have the time to train everything that I want to train 3 times a week.
Yeah, you and I are like a seamless connection here. That was literally going to be my next point, is you have to consider your limitations and try to work within them to allocate volume where you want to grow. So there's a couple of limitations. One of them is scheduling, like, you just don't have enough time. Another one is you're reaching what's called so in the MEV to MRV discussion, you could reach your local maximum recoverable volume, where you're just training too much for your muscle to recover, and training less is the answer. But there's another kind of maximum recoverable volume called systemic MRV, which is, if you train like chest and shoulders and back and quads, and you train them a lot, your total body system recovery starts to get really, really impinged, and it becomes difficult for you to survive any more hard training. Once you hit your systemic MRV, or you're close to it, you can't just add more volume for body parts, because your whole body starts to rebel against you, and it's too much of a fight or flight state. You can't recover from that much training. So a lot of times the answer there is it's the same answer if your schedule is keeping you from doing more, or if you're schedule free but you're hitting your systemic MRV because you're trying to grow everything all at the same time. It's a matter of backing up to maintenance volume, which is actually quite low. It's sometimes a third of what your MEV to MRV volume is. Maintenance volume on stuff you don't super care about expanding right now, and then go MEV to MRV, normal training volume progression, on the stuff you care about. So like you said, if you want to really improve your back, your chest might have to be on the back burner, which means just a couple of sets of chest every other session is going to be like fine. And then people say, well, but that doesn't grow my chest. Well, there's no way around this. Like, just as a public service announcement, because I'm feeling like an asshole today, it's one of the most baffling things I ever hear is people are like, I can't train any more than 3 times a week, and I want to bring up everything, but I'm at a plateau. What do I do? I got nothing for you. It's like, I want to go 200 miles an hour in a Ford Focus, but I don't want to soup it up or get a new car. Like, well, it's just not going to happen. Like, there's no trick, there's no quirk, there's no hack. I'm sorry, you just have to do more work and or reallocate your efforts.
The one question that's still front of brain for me is intensity. Anything on rep range?
It's not super important, but I think a spectrum of repetition ranges is a good idea. So there's generally 3 spectra of rep ranges. There's the 5 to 10 rep range, the 10 to 20 rep range, and the 20 to 30 rep range. Anything heavier than that is a waste of your time. Anything lighter than that's a waste of your time for muscle growth. So I think that if you're exclusively training in one of those ranges for a muscle group and you haven't experimented the other ranges, try the other range, right? And so basically your average mesocycle should have like probably 50% of your volume in the 10 to 20 range, 25% of your volume in the 5 to 10 range, and 25% of your volume in the 20 to 30 range. And here's where this actually threads into another thing I was going to bring up. You should be watching your body to see where you get your best pumps, your best soreness, your best mind muscle connection, which rep range, and maybe do a bit more in that rep range and less in the others. You know what I mean? So some guys will squat
Yeah, I
for
like
sets of
that.
6, and their sets of 6 squats will just hurt their knees and nothing else. But when they squat for sets of 15, it blows up their quads like crazy, and their knees are fine. You should probably just be doing more sets of 15 and less sets of 6, not exclusively, but a little bit of a bias factor there. And on that note, there is something, this is a very minor note, right? Is maybe you don't have a sufficiently strong mind muscle connection, or the exercises you're using are really poor for that mind muscle connection. This usually occurs with body parts like the back, parts you can't see. I mean, there could be a technical issue. So, for example, as people say, my hamstrings aren't doing so well, but do you know how to do a proper stiff legged deadlift? Technique sort of looks okay, but if you guide them through feeling their hamstrings on it, they're like, oh my God, like, my hamstrings are sore for the first time ever. Like, yeah, you were hinging at the hip and the knee too much. You should be isolating the knee a bit more.
Yep. I run into that with bench press with guys sometimes too.
All the time. Exactly. Bench press doesn't feel like anything. First of all, we improve your technique. We teach you how to arch and retract. All of a sudden, boom, your pecs are getting hit. And or maybe you're more of an incline dumbbell press kind of guy. So it's searching for techniques that allow better mind muscle connection, and sometimes for exercises. And lastly, every now and again, and for beginners this is not a thing, but for intermediates, every 3 to 5 mesocycles, your body just gets tired of training with high volumes and gets tired of growing. And this happens at a muscle specific and probably a central level as well, or systemic level. So every half a year to year, you should probably take a month of really low volume training, like literally maintenance volume, kind of like a power lifter would train. A month of no pumps, no soreness, just lifting relatively heavy and just leaving the gym twice a week for each body part, 2 to 4 sets per session. That's it. And what that can do is it can resensitize you to muscle growth because your body's just tired of doing it. It's kind of like saying my work performance is really slumped. I feel burnt out. Go on vacation. You come back and everything's bright as ever and super new. So I think those low volume phases, we've called them resensitization phases in literature, maintenance phases, they're really quite effective. They're research supported in a variety of contexts. So it's actually been shown that if you take every 4 weeks, if you take 2 weeks off of training completely, at the end of that entire block, you grow as much as someone who never took any time off, which is kind of interesting, right? So you're not going to lose a crap load of muscle doing it. You're going to lose zero muscle, and it's going to revitalize and resensitize you to grow more muscle.
Yeah, that's an interesting tip. That's something I was reviewing that research with, I don't remember what, just recently. That's something that I haven't worked into my training, but I can think of times where it kind of worked out that way and it seemed to help.
Yep. Things just get really stale, and then you train them a little less and you come back and boom, you're getting pumps and getting soreness from a way smaller number of sets than you're used to getting. Sometimes you ever feel in your training like you're just spinning your wheels, like, I could just be doing squats forever. I don't even get pumps or sore anymore. Like, that's
Yeah.
not how it's supposed to work.
Yeah, it's very true. Again, I've been there on and off over the last couple of years. I've had some periods where I'm sleeping well, everything's okay, and I'm making progress, and then periods where I'm not sleeping so well and stress is higher. And I've just accepted it, and I just keep on going to the gym, and I don't let it get me down. But I just it just is what it is. If I could snap my fingers, if I could wave my magic wand, and all of a sudden, and not have to experience the stress or the sleep disruptions, I would anyway. So this is all great information. I mean, honestly, you've touched on every point that I had. Is there anything beyond where can people find you? That'd be my next question is, where can people find you, and what do you have new and exciting that is coming, and what else do you want people to know about you and what you're doing?
Thanks so much. Yeah, no, it's been a pleasure. I think just work through, rewind the podcast and work through sequentially all the stuff we talked about, because we talked about it and we had a really great alignment on what's most likely to get you in trouble first. One, know what your plateau is, or if you're even having one. Another one, make sure you're deloading. Then make sure your nutrition, weight gain, stress management, etc. Then your volume landmarks. Then talk about your systemic versus local fatigue, and do you need a low volume phase, and are you really targeting the lats like you're supposed to? Because a lot of people will start first with the last one, right? Like, oh, I'm having trouble growing my lats. Should I do underhand curl or pull-ups or overhand? But guy, you're not going to point to me someone with huge lats and say it's for sure underhand pull-ups that did it. So if I can tell you that guy with huge lats probably sleeps pretty well, eats pretty well, you know what I mean, and consistently trains within his volume landmark. So just going through that process and not thinking there's any magic. And as far as where people can find me, RP Strength on Instagram is the company that I helped co-found, Renaissance Periodization. We've got all kinds of cool digital products, tons of books if you want to learn more about explaining all this much more depth. We have an app that writes your diet for you and coaches you through AI. It's called the RP Diet app. It's on Android and iPhone. Just go to Google Play and iTunes Store and get them. And then I'm at RPDRMIKE on Instagram, and I post videos and stuff, and I'm on Facebook too, and I post a lot of good stuff. I think maybe mostly half naked pictures of myself, sometimes videos, and I've got a pay site where I do much cooler shit. I'm totally kidding, but I should probably give that some
The
thought.
premium Snapchat.
And
The premium
that's all I've
Snapchat.
got. Exactly. Oh yes. Oh yeah, the Patreon.
All right. Awesome, man. I really appreciate you taking the time. Would love to have you back. It was a great discussion.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Hey there, it's Mike again. I hope you enjoyed this episode and found it interesting and helpful. And if you did and don't mind doing me a favor, then please do give this video a like and leave a comment down below. Not only do I like to hear from everybody and I jump in and reply to as many comments as I can, it also helps other people find their way to the show and learn how to build their best bodies ever too. And of course, if you want to be notified when the next episode goes live, then just subscribe to my channel and you won't miss out on any of the new content. Lastly, if you didn't like something about the show, then definitely shoot me an email at mike@muscleforlife.com and share your thoughts on how you think it could be better. I read everything myself and I'm always looking for constructive feedback, so please do reach out. Thanks again for listening to the episode, and I hope to hear from you soon. And lastly, this episode is brought to you by me. Seriously though, I'm not big on promoting stuff that I don't personally use and believe in, so instead I'm going to just quickly tell you about something of mine. Specifically, my 100% natural post-workout supplement Recharge. Recharge helps you gain muscle and strength faster and recover better from your workouts, and it's also naturally sweetened and flavored, and it contains no artificial food dyes, fillers, or other unnecessary junk. All that is why it has over 700 reviews on Amazon with a 4.5-star average, and another 200 on my website, also with a 4.5-star average. So if you want to be able to push harder in the gym, train more frequently, and get more out of your workouts, then you want to head over to www.legionathletics.com and pick up a bottle of Recharge today. And just to show how much I appreciate my podcast peeps, use the coupon code PODCAST at checkout and you will save 10% on your entire order. And lastly, you should also know that I have a very simple 100% money back guarantee that works like this. You either love my stuff or you get your money back, period. You don't have to return the products. You don't have to fill out forms. You don't have to jump through any other hoops or go through any other shenanigans. So you really can't lose here. Head over to www.legionathletics.com now, place your order, and see for yourself why my supplements have thousands of rave reviews all over the internet. And if for whatever reason they're just not for you, contact us and we will give you a full refund on the spot.